Hello, this is Pat Wagner with Pattern Research, Inc. This video was produced on behalf of the Colorado State Library as part of the Successful Supervision online course, but the concepts apply to any library supervisor's work. The Successful Supervision online course has been made possible in part through grant funds from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, administered by the Colorado State Library. The Successful Supervision program we're watching today is Introduction to the Organizational Map. And I'm very excited about doing this because this is sort of the foundation for understanding how supervision fits into everything else that you're doing in the library. The key idea for the program today is that each point of view is needed for success. And it's very important to understand that when we talk about the different parts of the map, it's not that leadership is more important than management and management is more important than supervision, and they're all more important than the frontline and backroom tasks. Everything is needed for success. And what we're going to learn is how supervision fits into this larger map. Our agenda today is we're going to have an overview of the organizational map and then look at the three main components: the task, supervision and management, and leadership. We're also going to be talking about the assignments that fit in after you finish viewing this video, and also looking at the resource guide that's going to be part of the course. Here's the map. Now, the map has been around in different forms since the 1920s, but I believe it actually started in the 19th century as part of the progressive movement, when we started to apply what we considered science to dealing with things like how do institutions work and how can we deal with the problems that came about from big organizations created during the industrial era. I've had MBAs in classes that I've taught, particularly for trustees and volunteers, who've said, oh yes, we studied this as part of our program. But the idea is it's not about your title. It's not about, well, leaders as like directors and administrators are above the managers and supervisors who are above the task-oriented people. It's really about what you pay attention to, your point of view, and how you deal with time. So the three components we'll be talking about today are leadership, which is about risk, influence in the future, and it's about where are we going and why, the biggest picture of all. Then we're going to talk about supervision and management, of course, which is the focus of this particular course. And we're going to create an arbitrary difference. And remember, it's not about the title, it's about what people do. Supervision, it's about people, eliciting the best and keeping folks on track. Management is more about things as well as supervising other supervisors, and it's about what we might call resource allocation and projects, deciding how to spend money and how to staff projects, and coordinating among different teams, departments, branches, and so on. It's also about budgets and timelines and constantly looking for efficiencies without losing quality as part of what we're doing. And then we have the front line, tasks and tactics. That's the hands-on work, and it includes things like professional work. If you're a degreed professional librarian, for example, a subject matter expert, or a cataloger who does original monograph cataloging, it's about the technical work and the clerical work. So anything that's hands-on is what we call the task. So this is the map, and what we're going to be thinking about today is how supervision fits into this particular map. So let's take a look at the task. And I have to say that I am Pat Wagner, and I am a task-oriented person. It's very much about the how. And when I'm helping folks with their strategic plans, this is where we're saying, we have these great ideas, we know these projects we want to complete, how exactly are they going to get done? And it often is why we first decided to be in a library in the first place, right? Almost every profession and every workplace I talk to, people who really love their work will actually say, yeah, when I was a little kid, I wanted to do this or that. I just had a dear friend of mine send me a note, someone I've known since junior high school, and I've known him since he was 14, And when he was 14, he knew he wanted to be a photographer. And now he's 70. And guess what? He's still a photographer. But I don't run into many people who at the age of 5 or 10 say, oh, I want to be a manager. That's usually not what they're about. It usually is about interactions with library customers, even if you're in tech services or cataloging. It's about that immediacy that you have with your customers. Tends to be more detail oriented. And in terms of time, it's about what's right in front of us, right in front of us. And so it's about the hours and days and weeks. Some people actually call it a short time horizon. When I'm in my task mode, I'm very focused on what I have to do in the next 24 hours. When my husband and I first started working together many years ago, he put a dumb terminal on my desk in it was 1977. And he had created a database program that we were going to use. And he was very, very, very insistent that I put the data in the database a certain way. And I was like, no, I'm kind of a, quick person. I'm a little sloppy sometimes, superficial. I just wanted to get it done quickly. So we argued a lot about that. Well, he was right. Because he set up a system, because he was thinking years in advance, it meant that when I put the data in, it meant that everything was consistent and the same. And when inevitably we went to new hardware and software, the data moved seamlessly because of the structure. But as a task-oriented person, I don't always think about the future. That's why we need all the different groups. It also is a place where we test theories. We come up with these big ideas, and then we find out at the front line whether or not they're actually going to work. So hopefully there's always a dialogue going on among the different parts of the map. Every way of seeing the world, the point of view that we have, has limitations, which is why we need all the different points of view. And the task limitations, again, we have to generalize. All models of human behavior are totally inadequate. So this is broad brush, but it might give some insights to why there's sometimes conflict between employees and their supervisors, regardless of what they're doing in the workplace. So, for example, one limitation that some task people have, like Pat Wagner, is that short time horizon. I'm really good at a service desk. I'm really good at being at a circulation desk. I'm really great at those quick decisions that have to be made. And I sometimes feel like Mighty Mouse, here I am to save the day. But again, maybe not so good at planning. I had to learn how to be a planner. I had to learn how to be a leader in running our little business. And I think, in fact, that's why some small enterprises fail, because the people who are running them are Pat Wagners. They're task-oriented people who don't see the future. Another thing that sometimes happens with task-oriented people is they have what we call the autonomy bug. If you've noticed, I've been self-employed most of my life. I haven't had a straight job since 1976. And one of the reasons is that I don't necessarily play well with others. Trust me, none of you would want to hire me, because I really focus on my work. And the good part is I'm a self-starter. Tell me what to do, get out of my way, and I'll get it done for you. But on the other side of it, I don't like that loss of autonomy, of being able to make decisions on my own. So sometimes it's hard for me to remember I'm part of a team. We also have perfectionists, and we'll be talking more in this series about perfectionism. But one thing that happens is that when you're in perfectionist mode, you sort of forget that you also have to be paying attention to things like timelines, deadlines, and budgets. And so getting sometimes, when I'm in perfectionist mode, getting me to back off to say, we don't need your A+ game here, it's too expensive, it's hard for me to let go. Sometimes there's that silo approach, my head's down, I'm getting the work done, I'm not paying attention necessarily, as I said before, to how what I'm doing and the decisions I'm making are impacting what's going around me. And I might also be holding on to things that I really love to do that no longer are relevant. So when I work with libraries, when they're having to make big decisions on cutting budgets and costs and making big shifts strategically, one of the things that happens is we get these pet projects that sort of bubble up. One of my favorite ones, and this is a true story, had to do with the China teacup collection, bone china, that had been given to the library many years ago by one of the lovely people in the community who donated money to the library. And we're not talking about a couple of teacups. It was a whole cabinet, large cabinet. Well, let me be honest, a wall of teacups going back to the 18th and 19th century. Quite beautiful. And they were discussing in the group that they had to get rid of the teacups, maybe give them to the Historical Society or some other group, give them back to the family, maybe who had originally donated them. And the person who was sort of self-appointed in charge of the teacups was really upset about having to give away the teacups. And she finally said to the group, "But Miss Agnes will be so upset." And the director, with great kindness, said, "Yes, but she's been dead for 40 years. I think we can do this." So sometimes people will hide these pet projects and redo them, actually redo them. Even if they've been told that they have to stop doing, they'll sort of sneak them in as well. And then we have the issue of avoiding management and leadership altogether. And we call this people who are lurkers. Now, there's a lot of reasons that somebody you might call it, stay in the task level. They love their job and they don't care about promotions or more money. They love their job, but they have a very compelling life after work. So they want a job that they can leave at 5 o'clock and pay attention to their family and the things that they're doing outside. And as long as they're doing their work well, that shouldn't bother us. But for some people, it's an abdication of responsibility. They don't want to be someone who has to worry about big picture issues. And you see that when you have someone on the staff who's been complaining for years about the unfair compensation of some people on the staff, and you finally are able to put together staff committees to give real input to the powers that be, that we have to change the way people are paid and how they're compensated. And the person who's been complaining the most refuses to serve on the committee. And it's very frustrating, because you also know that after the committee has made their decisions and given their input, that's the person who's going to be complaining the most. So every level has these kinds of limitations. These are the ones that we tend to notice when we're a supervisor or manager. So what's the difference between the task orientation and supervision and management? Instead of being how we're focused on the details, it's about what are we trying to achieve. And in the same way that the task is focused on procedures, at the management level is when we're thinking about policies. We also have to worry about something called boundary management. And there's a book that will be in your resource guide by Dr. Linda Hill, who's with Harvard. And it's a book called Becoming a Manager that's been in print for almost 20 years. And in it, she talks about the fact that the demands that are being made on you from above the food chain and versus what the employees want may be very different. So you spend a lot of time juggling between those two sets, and it's called boundary management. Supervision and management is also very much about project management and getting people to get things done on time, under budget, at a level of quality that everybody agrees on, and, or most people agree on, and everyone is treated well. It also thinks about teams. I tell people that one of the characteristics of a good supervisor or manager is they have an automatic reaction to think about the team. And so they pause before they make a decision and they check in to see how something is going to be affected. They also spend time with what we call lateral management. Lateral management are those relationships that you build and sustain in the workplace that are people who are equal to you in the organizational chart, but might be in another department, another team, another building. and you're maintaining those relationships too. So one difference is that task-oriented people tend to be more about the external customer. Supervisors and managers are focused more on what we might call the internal customers. It's about the bigger picture, the longer time spans, just like we talked about with my husband. I'm thinking in days, he was thinking in years. So the timeline is months and quarters and years. It's what they pay attention to. What's the difference? And this is very arbitrary for this little model. Supervisors are focused on eliciting the best from people, and they take on all those roles: the scout, the coach, the mentor, the teacher, the cheerleader. One of my favorite descriptions of someone who's good at supervision is that they'll tell you, come on, it will be fun, to get you to do something that you might not otherwise want to do. We can call it the supervisor lie. Moms and dads do this as well. And at the same time that you're keeping people excited about work, or at least making sure they know that they're appreciated, you're also keeping people on track. It's what we call course correction, to make sure that we're aligned and focused on the same goals. A manager, and again, this is very arbitrary, when you have your management hat on, again, it's that idea of resource allocation. It's all the parts that we know go together with project management. It's very much about coordinating things too, to be able to step back and say, well, this department's doing this, but so is this and this. And when you get up to the administration level, that's where someone's looking at the budget and saying, oh my goodness, this particular part of the library, the children's department, needs more money. Where are we going to get it from? And what happens if I take part of that budget that's been assigned to another department and give it to children's? Because life changes, right? So it's about that, very much focused on productivity and focused on the bigger picture as well. Each level has its own limitations, and these are things that we should maybe watch out for a little bit, even if you've been a supervisor for a long time. One is what we call the bureaucratic mindset. And in organizational development, it's almost a cliche that people in sort of the middle management level are the ones who are going to be more resistant to change, because in their job, they're concerned about consistency and stability. But at the extreme, it's when the rule book is more important than the people we serve. And it's that inflexibility that we have to watch out for. We also have what we call list makers. And list makers are the supervisor manager version of the perfectionist. They make wonderful lists. And oh, by the way, we're not talking about someone who makes a grocery list, or if you make lists of things to do. It refers to the fact that people are so busy planning, they can never launch. They can't make decisions. They're so afraid of making a mistake that, in effect, things get frozen. And that's always a concern. And then we have micromanagers. For a long time, I could not define a micromanager, but I knew one when I saw one. And so when I get called in to a workplace to deal with a micromanager, the first thing I noticed that they were mostly really good people, and they were smart, and oftentimes they did their task job very well before they were promoted to supervisor or manager. It was one of the reasons they were promoted. But they might not necessarily have people skills. They also might think that it was really important for them to get other people to do what needed to be done in a way that they liked, right? Everyone has to do it exactly the way they like. And in preparing this program, I went and double-checked again online for different variations of the definition of micromanagement, and everybody kind of says the same thing. It's when you're focused so much on the detail, the how of what people are doing, is that actually you're interfering with their productivity. And it's typically when you have a task-oriented person who doesn't have the bigger picture, the people skills, they're automatically promoted to supervisor or manager, which is, I think, a sin in the American workplace. It happens everywhere, not just in libraries. and they don't know how to influence people. They don't understand the bigger picture. They don't have to plan. All they're focused on is, well, you should be doing the job exactly the way that I used to do the job. And to be honest with you, most of us, when we're promoted, and this is my statistic that I've made up in my head, are able to understand the supervisor manager frame of mind after a couple of years. We kind of get it. But some people are not able to get it. And it has nothing to do with how smart or experienced they are. So those limitations are there, and it's something that we have to understand about ourselves. What about leadership? Leadership is about where are we going and why. It's the biggest picture of all. And when we're talking about the strategic plan, it's the mission and the vision and the values and the principles. It's also about the decisions that wake us up in the middle of the night. One way to think about it, which was a little metaphor that was given to me by a library supervisor many, many years ago, is that in a public library, the task orientation is when somebody is actually running a summer reading program. They're making marks on the chart, they're handing out the coupons for the free ice cream cones, they're setting up new book displays every day, and that's the task. Management is when you're thinking about next year's summer reading program, or you're coordinating summer reading between different departments, between the library and the school district, between different branches and so on. But leadership is when you wake up in the middle of the night and realize that you got a great relationship with the school district, that summer reading kind of eats up our brains for 5 or 6 months every year. I mean, people are planning next year's summer reading in the middle of this year's summer reading. Why don't we cooperate with the school district, let them take on the logistics, we take on the fun part, and we'll have more time to do other things. Usually a strategic shift will tick off some people, and a good leader has to decide who they're going to tick off by making those big, big changes. Also, leadership in libraries, whether you're an academic school or public library or a special library, is much about what happens outside the walls of the library. It's about dealing with building credibility with external stakeholders, which means people like other leaders and other organizations, political and financial decision makers, the media, community leaders, and so on. People who are important in the community, which means everyone who might not necessarily actually use the library, but can certainly influence its success. Leaders are always looking for new alliances, new opportunities for collaboration and cooperation outside the walls of the library. And in their timeline, they think of years and even decades. They'll be thinking about, if the population keeps expanding the way it is, and we tend to have a lot of growth here in Colorado, where are we going to find the land and money to be able to expand in 5 or 10 years? And that's where the leaders' focus is on. We sometimes call it on the shining mansion on the hill. Leaders are change agents. They disrupt the status quo, usually ticking off the supervisors and managers. And there are potential limitations, just like with any other part. You have the lone eagle who is sometimes indifferent or unaware about how their big decisions impact everybody else, and don't find ways to mitigate what happens. And then sometimes, even in library land, one time we run into the elitist who really does think they're better than other people. That never happens in Colorado, but you've probably heard it happens in other libraries in other parts of the planet as well. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the assignments that we'd like you to be thinking about. If you are attending this course, as usual, we're going to ask you to post your list, the annotated list, to the LinkedIn group. And what we're going to be doing is giving you an assignment in a couple of minutes where you're going to be coming up with a way to decide what you do in the workplace. Is it mostly task, if it's mostly supervision management, or what part of what you do is leadership? And as usual, we're going to ask you to comment on your choices and also the comments and posts of your classmates. We're trying to create a community dialogue. So that's why we're warning you, please don't wait until the last day before things are due to post, because you want to be able to post quickly and then have that interaction with other people. If you happen to be watching this on your own, we're going to invite you to go through the assignments and share them with people at work. Reflect, write, and discuss what you learned with your colleagues as well. So what are the assignments? Well, we have the required assignments, and then we have 2 optional assignments. The required assignment is to list 10 work activities you regularly handle in your workplace. And they can be little things or big things. They can be concrete, they can be abstract. Make a list, and then take a look based on the organizational map, which are tasks, which of these qualify as something that falls under supervision or management, and which would you say qualify as leadership, and you use a T, an S, or an L. And you might say, well, you know, here's something I do in the workplace. It really is both supervision and leadership. Well, put both letters there. That's just fine. And then think about what you might have to change. So 2 optional discussions are, what's difficult about spending more time as a supervisor, particularly if you also are required to do task work. And this is very common, that you get promoted, you don't have any more time, you're not paid any more money, but now you are called a supervisor and you have to do that mystical thing called supervision while you still are doing whatever task you were assigned in the beginning. And then, what do you think you could do differently in order to spend more time as a supervisor if you also are required to do task work? And let me give you a little hint that if you're a perfectionist in your task work, you probably won't have as much time to do supervision. You'll also have more information about the organizational map with more detail on the resource guide, which is the PDF that will be sent to you as well, or will be posted. And we hope that that information will also help you with this particular assignment. This is the list of videos that are going to be part of the course. We just finished with the introduction to the organizational map, and the next one in line is what's different about being a supervisor. And we hope that you join us for that as well. And again, this is Pat Wagner with Pattern Research, Inc. on behalf of the Colorado State Library.